Um, that would not be good. Welcome everyone to this 100 Days of No Code workshop. We've got Michael Novotny. Really pleased to be joined with him, not only because he's a good friend of mine, but also because he's doing some really fantastic stuff in the space. Not only around the tools that you're using and understanding which stack you should be approaching your builds with, but actually understanding how you should validate your projects and just go about building lean with no code. So in this session, we're going to cover a few things which I'll let Michael touch on, but we're going to have some time for questions at the end as well. So do think of those as we're going along, and make sure to ask them at the end for Michael. So I hope that sounds really good. It does to me, and I shall pass it over to you, Michael, to take it away from here.
Sure. Awesome. Hey, Max, thanks so much for the opportunity to join you here. I've been a big fan of 100 Days of No Code. I've used it. It's been helpful in me and allowed me to get more successful and more encouragement and validation, as well as feedback that I've gotten from 100 Days of No Code, without a doubt. So this was a no-brainer for me to just try to share what I've learned, and then try to tell a story and try to be as non-boring as possible. So if we can, I've got some things to show. I was going to share my desktop. I want to make sure I share the right one here, desktop number 1. And if you could just confirm that it's come through.
Perfectly. Yes. Yeah.
You see it?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I really like how you've kind of set this up to be something that's not professional, because I'm not the best presenter. So I appreciate you lowering the bar. But quite honestly, I do want this to be informal and just conversational as much as possible. So if anybody has a question while we're going through this, please let me know. But let's get into it. So one of my favorite quotes is from Steve Jobs. Essentially, I'm not going to read this to you, but essentially, the fact that you can build your own things, and that there aren't, everything that's created in this world is by people that are no smarter than you or I. And I really believe that. I really believe that if we're passionate about something, we can learn it, we can be experts, and we can, and now with no code, we can build it. And so when Steve said this, there wasn't essentially like no code tools like we have it today. It was, you had to be a developer to build those things. But the next iteration of this with no code, I think, is just an amazing time right now. I hate to use the buzzword, what a time to be alive, but honestly, like it is, I feel very fortunate that we have these tools and we can try to use them to build things that we have an idea about. So a little bit about me. I launched a marketplace startup in 2016, was able to actually get revenue. I went through the whole thing where I did a Delaware C Corp. I failed a ton, learned a ton. And that was kind of my journey that kicked off my journey of realizing that I was doing everything the wrong way because I was not in Silicon Valley. I thought that the playbook to create an idea was startup or nothing. I didn't understand Bootstrap. I didn't understand indie hacking. I didn't understand, and no code really wasn't a thing yet. So through trial and error and studying hundreds of makers, I've been able to get some breakout success with some of my projects there. Get Stacked was the #1 product hunt of the day. It's been used over 3,000 times by makers to get a free recommendation of which no-code tools to use. So it's a really popular tool in the marketplace and that you can use today. And then Side Project Stack is also a free resource. And then recently I'm getting ready to launch the Lean Side Project. So basically what I like to try to do is just help people get what's in their head and out to the world, and obviously some type of monetization. So I think the starting point for me and a lot of people and a lot of makers I talk to, because I've talked to hundreds of makers who ship things and dozens who have not, and we all have this idea. And so whether it be like a marketplace or a web app or a SaaS, like we have this idea and this inspiration. And the hardest thing in the world to do is to detach yourself from your idea, your vision, to then a starting point, because in your mind, you have this idea of this is what it needs to be acceptable by people. But what the problem is that we're only one user, right? We have to grow and get your first 100, your first 1,000, 2,000. So how do you do that? And when you look at the playbook for startups, you think this is what I need to do. But actually, those playbooks that we're looking at are for after you've already gone 0 to 1. Those are for 1 to N. And so what I've realized is a big gap in the marketplace, and the knowledge gap, and it was for me, and it took me years to learn, was how do you go from 0 to 1? And so what I found out was, turns out starting with an idea is, not the right place to start. When you start building, you should really instead start with what is the problem or the experience you're trying to solve. And again, I'm going to go back to, our everybody's favorite Steve Jobs. And I have this quote on Side Project Stack. And there's this video that's on YouTube that it's 2 minutes long. Everyone has to check this out. It's amazing. I mean, Steve Jobs, a legend, right? Like I'm not a fanboy, but there's so many things that he does and he responds that are just like so perfect. And this is a perfect example. Somebody asked him about this technology they've built at Apple and how do they go and find a customer for it. And so he pauses and he responds brilliantly with talking about, you have to start with a customer experience or problem and then work backwards in technology, right? And so that's kind of a popular 2021 version of this, is you have to start with your audience first. You have to start with what are the pain points in that audience, right? And so understanding that first, and then backing your way into a solution, and backing your way into then what tools you use to architect that solution. This is, the number one thing that, that I struggled with, and I see it time and time again. And so one of the ways I wanted to try to talk about this and explain it is through a story. So if you haven't already, you've got to check out Felix Wong. He's basically an indie hacker maker who uses no code to build things. And what's interesting about him is he intuitively knew about this approach. And I've talked with him about this before, and he has a certain framework for thinking about this. And it matches up with what I've also seen successful makers. When I've looked at hundreds of successful makers, I've been able to, as I've studied them and I've talked with them, I've been able to identify these key things. And one of the key things is, surprise, surprise, starting with some type of experience or problem and then working backwards and attacking it through there. And so if you go to his platform or to his Twitter, you can see some of these products. He's now moved on into another space. But his method for getting users and finding success and getting in revenue was proved out because of his starting point. And so you can see here, he's helping entrepreneurs succeed. And then this quote here is, he's basically designing to help startups develop funding knowledge. So he worked at a venture capital firm, like early stage. So what he did is he designed all these no-code products, Slides, VentureList, and Virtual Mojito, to help entrepreneurs get that early funding, right? Get that success. And so really, he's essentially identified what is his niche, and then what is the experience or the problem that he wants to do, and that's help entrepreneurs succeed. And so what he's done is then focused on that problem in that ecosystem, instead of just, I have all these ideas that may not be related to each other. He's married the problem and not the idea and the solution. And then what that does is that increases your odds of success. So a way to illustrate that, and please excuse my really crappy drawing, this is in the Lean Side Project, my current digital product that I'm working on. And I just try to very easily outline, like, this doesn't need to be rocket science, but there are certain steps we need to follow. One is, and I use Felix as an example, what is he trying to do? Reduce the friction for entrepreneurs to get funding, move from point A to point B. And so what I identified was, okay, what are some problems along that user journey, right? And I outlined those three here. Creating a pitch deck is time consuming. Fundraising is confusing and overwhelming. Growing your network is hard, right? And so it turns out, and I reverse engineer this, but those are all legitimate problems along that intersection, that journey. It turns out that he's created these products to solve all of those problems for that customer segment, for that person who's trying to get funding. With Slides.co, it's a easy to use slide deck presentation that's preformed. VentureList.com, or Virtual Mojito. VentureList is, here's a stack, here's no code stack here. So what he's doing is, he doesn't have to be successful with his first one, his second one, or his third one. But why this strategy works is that it's a small bet strategy with a compounding effect. So every single time he launches something and he does it quickly, it builds off the success of the previous one, which increases his chance that he's able to get that breakthrough success or monetization or follower count, whatever it is that you're looking for to try to do and grow. So a couple key points here. Focus on the problem, not the product. List all the adjacent problems. And that's actually a good thing, because what that does is it gives you a roadmap. And because a lot of makers that I've talked to, again, I've talked to many, many of them who come to my platform, 60% of them, or I'm sorry, 70% of them have never launched something. So I've asked them, like, what is getting in the way of you not being able to launch? They don't have a clear starting point. There's all these problems. And what happens with your mind is then you become overwhelmed and you get paralysis by analysis. I don't know where to start. That's okay, right? If you list out and you draw out in that user journey way that I just showed you all those adjacent problems, now you're basically flip that problem on its head. Now you're excited during your 100 days of no code journey to then create products for each one of those problems. You don't need to get hung up on which one goes first. Just start doing it. And so once you've gone through those steps, you can use a free resource, getstack.io, which I created. It's automated. It's also built in no code. And it recommends a good starting point of which no code tools to use based off of your experience level, your skill level, your idea, and also like the complexity of your build. So now you have a list of products, you have a list of tools you can use to create those. And now during your 100 days of no code, you can really commit yourself to something to say, hey, I'm going to see this out for the next 100 days. These are the things that I want to do. And giving yourself time to be able to operate. I just saw an interesting tweet just before I wish I had it pulled up. It was a freelancer, and he was building in public, and he was talking about his revenue per month. And essentially, his revenue per month was, he was talking about basically his first month as a freelancer, he earned like $1,600. His second month was $0, and his third month was $0. But then his fourth month was $4,000. His fifth month was $6,000. His seventh month, I don't know if he had a 7 month, but you get the picture. And he says, wow, what would have happened if I had given up on my third month? Right. And coincidentally, that third month is right at 90 days. Right. And so I think what's so cool about that is there's some threshold. Nobody knows what that threshold is, but I think 100 days is perfect for giving you the chance to see something through and commit yourself, but also be excited about it. You should not be working on one thing and shipping one thing within 100 days. I strongly advise against that. That is setting yourself up for disappointment, because no matter who you are, and I think any maker you talk to, chances are that you get a hit your first time, unless you already have an audience, is very low. With how noisy it is out there in the world today, it's a very hard thing to do, unless you have some type of unusual authority or you have some unusual story. So an example would be Daniel Vassallo. I don't know if you guys have seen him. He was an Amazon engineer who quit his job. He was making $500,000 a year, and he said, "Screw this! I'm going to make things for myself." Okay, well, I mean, that's a mind-blowing story. Who quits a $500,000 a year job, right? And he's sold 2 digital products for $250,000. So maybe you have a story like that. I don't. So that strategy isn't going to work for me. Another example is what's his name, Lenny, who was a product manager at Airbnb. He's got authority, right? He starts giving away all this free content about how to be around product management, and his newsletter explodes. He can charge money. Do you know how hard it is to charge money for a newsletter? You have to be a standout for that. So maybe for the 5% of us who have that story, that's good. But what about the 95% of us? If you're like me, you need to think about, how am I going to stretch out all of the things that I'm doing and building related to a problem that I have in a niche, and how do I weave in my story? How do I care about this? So I want to get into some specific examples here and show, how do I think about this, right? So say you've gone through those steps and say you want to create a marketplace. I love Mike Williams. He's an excellent founder, perfect case study to learn from. You got to check out his stuff. If you're doing a marketplace, he goes deep on here on how to help people get started with marketplaces. Strongly encourage you check him out. Basically, he launched a marketplace called Studio Time that allows people to discover and book music studios. So he did this with a platform called ShareTribe. And coincidentally, I used ShareTribe to launch my marketplace back in 2016. Now, there's a version of ShareTribe that he used called ShareTribe Go. That's about $150 a month, but you get your first 30 days free. So with that version, you don't get a lot of flexibility to get all the bells and whistles and configurations that you want. There's an additional level up of Share Tribe that's called Share Tribe Flex that you can use. This is where you can add some variability and get some customization, and then they can connect you with a React developer to get all the bells and whistles that you want. But that could be about $3,000 to $5,000. So the lesson here is, don't start at the top with all the bells and whistles. It's how can you start as minimally as possible and as little as cost as possible to get some validation going. That momentum is going to help direct your vision and where you're going. Another example is Side Project Stack. So when I first launched Side Project Stack, I thought my main revenue stream was going to be affiliate scheme. But what I found out was what people cared about is what my voice was. And so in order to give sound advice, I didn't feel like it was in the best interest of my platform to have some type of affiliate scheme, because there could be a conflict of interest. And so I stopped. I did not go forward with that. There actually turned out to be 3 or 4 other revenue mechanisms that I wanted to pursue, but none of them turned out, and I experimented to be the ones that worked. And so I'm now on my 5th idea of how I'm going to monetize this. But because I built it on WordPress, the cost was virtually nil. You'll need time to figure it out, and unless you have an exact playbook or model that you can go after. So that's why it's so important to kind of build minimally. So I show a few other examples here. All of these are available on Side Project Stack. You can kind of see their full stacks. Also the Lean Side Project. Here's a couple of founders here. At the bottom, you can see what they're building and using Bubble. They provide some additional functionality. Again, I wouldn't encourage you to use Bubble unless for your V1, unless you have some unfair advantage. You already build in Bubble. You can hire somebody to get that initial version produced in less than 30 days, or you find a template that has everything that you need. And so that's why you need to do your due diligence. So next thing is web apps. This is a great case study. Dr. Nikhil Kothari, I hope I'm saying his name correctly. I absolutely love this example because he's a doctor and he advises and helps people with diabetes. And so he created a Glide app that solves that problem and helping him have better interaction experience with his patients, right? So here we have a doctor actually creating software. To me, this blows my mind. And this is what really excites me is he's not going after, the technology space. He's creating something that's solving a problem for him in his space that he's an expert at. Now he has an unfair advantage because ordinarily he wouldn't spend $20,000, $30,000 for somebody to codify this. But for less than, I don't know, $10, $15 for a Glide membership, he can create this and actually create it. Glide apps is one of those apps that obviously it's a little bit it's much lower on the learning curve. But once you kind of get that initial validation, right? And I should have put this quote in here, but one of the makers that I follow, Peter Levels, he talks about the only real validation out there is when someone pays you for something, right? And so it's really, and I was talking with Sean McCabe, who is a creator. He started from scratch, went from 0 to 6-figure business that wasn't built with no code. He does media and content creation. But what he talked about is how he still didn't have a website. He just started with the money, the revenue, and seeing if someone can pay you for a service, and then working backwards from there, right? And so, but sometimes you need to actually create something to get that validation. And so, using Glide apps is a good one step. Using Bubble is a good V2 step once you kind of get that going. And I'll show you why here in a second. But wanted to show out a couple of examples here of some founders that are rock stars. Christian Alexander, Nate Washington, picture here at the top. They created a Bubble app called Coins. And basically it allows you to plug into your finances and save and rounds up all of your spending to the nearest dollar and then put that into a savings account. So they built this with Bubble. First 3 years, 2 to 3 years, that was their product. They raised a round in early January for $3.6 million. And they've got a native app built, right? They've actually developed with code. Matt Henderson, he's created this app called Press Hunt. He's created completely with no code. I forget how much revenue, but he's earning, $10 to $20,000 per month on this. But the complexity around what he built is high. And so the problem is unless you have an unfair advantage with building, which you can get long term, you need to get validation, because it's always going to take you longer to build than you may think. So, what are the principles we're learning here? So this is some actual data that I've shared on Twitter that I have in the Lean side project. And what I would like you to focus on is right here. So what I've done is I've got over 150 products listed in my database. I've reached out to all these founders and gotten data back from 111 of them on exactly how much time it took them to use each tool in their stack to build their product, right? And so what I've done is I've aggregated all of that. So, you can also see it for each product. So if you go into the database, you can see, hey, I've got this idea for this. You can filter for it. You can find, oh, this is similar to what I'm thinking. Here's the tools. This is how long it might take me to build it out. And it really helps you get a good expectation for what to expect, and which is half the battle when you're making something, because sometimes it can take a lot longer. You can be demoralized or saddened or depressed with, hey, when you're a creator, there's ups and downs. It's a roller coaster. And to illustrate the point, to get back to what are we learning here, in the database, I because of my experience, I label each stack as an expert level, mid-level, or starter stack. A Glide app would be an example of a starter stack. Press Hunt by Matt Henderson or Christian Alexander, that would be an example of an expert level stack, right? So what is the estimated amount of time it took them to build something that could be used by another user? You can see all the users who've created a starter stack in my data took an average of 3.4 hours to build, right? I'm sorry, took about 10 hours to build, 3.4 nights. So I put this in like side project terms. Like if you work on your project, 2 or 3 hours a night, how many nights would that take you? Because that's kind of, what generally happens when you're making a side project. Compare that to expert level, which is 37.9, right? Evenings. So you're looking at almost 2 months to build that out. That's way too long, because if you're doing this every single night, you need to have some type of wind in your sails, and you need to get validation. And if you're building something that takes almost 40 to 60 days to build, before you show it to people, you're invariably going to get things wrong that aren't validated, and then you got to go rebuild. So this may be multiplied into 90 or 120 days easily before you land on a product that actually people want. And so when I launched, my startup marketplace, I built it for almost a year without talking to users. And I know everyone says that sounds crazy, but it's so easy to get into that trap, because we think that when we have our vision, no one will accept it unless it's the end product. It's the version 4. And nothing could be further from the truth. And so, Max, you had to know this was coming, and I have to show this because, this is probably one of the ugliest websites that I've ever seen. But I'm not here to dog my friend Max Hanning. I actually want to praise him, because he did something in his first try that has taken me, 8 or 9 tries to get right and get over myself. And I'm really, really impressed with what Max did here. Whether it's a stroke of genius or dumb luck, I don't know. We'll leave that to Max. But the principle here, and it was so hard, and what I've noticed when I'm talking to the makers is so hard to get them to do, is they don't want to put something out that they're not embarrassed of, right? And so Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, talks about, if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've launched too late. There's so much truth to this, because what happens is you don't want your product to be perfect for 2 reasons. One, if you look at the bell curve of adoption, at the top of your head, without looking and Googling it, can you name what is the first segment of users who are going to use your product? The first 2.5%. They're not early adopters. That's the next 12.5%. They're actually the innovators. And innovators don't want a finished product. Those are your first 1,000 users. Those are the first people that are going to use it. They're the ones who want it unfinished, because they're going to give feedback. They're going to become invested. Then they're going to become the ones that spread out and tell people about 100 Days of No Code, or tell people about your product. And then that's going to be how you get your first 1,000 users, not having a finished product. The second thing is, you also want it to be unfinished, because now, once you get the initial kind of core value prop or core product out there, now it's out there, right? So now you kind of claim a little stake to what you're doing. Now you can start building in the open and then using that as marketing, because the hardest thing as a solo maker is to do marketing and building at the same time. How do you do that? Well, if you get a first early ugly version out there, you can say unapologetically, like, hey, this is beta, guys. I'm just trying to experiment. Totally takes the pressure off and allows you during those 100 days of no code to get over yourself and just ship it. And I can say that easily now, but when I first launched my thing, I didn't follow this advice because I was following the startup playbook. I thought it had to be a finished version. And you can go check out one of our products I'm building right now. I'm 2 or 3 weeks into the build. I got a logo on a live product right now that is completely the wrong logo, and I don't even care. I've got 50 signups, and I'm getting validation that people don't care. They're able to get past the ugliness of it, and because they are saying this is a need, I'm interested in this. And so what you're doing is you're eliminating the false positives, and that's what you want to do when you're building during your 100 days. Is how do I launch this iteratively? How do I get validation and signals that I'm going the right way? So that at the end of 100 days, you're going to be feeling confident with what you've got, and you've got it validated on some level, instead of waiting for some big bang. Because invariably, I don't care what launch you're doing. In my experience, I never achieved something that's been like viral launch. Maybe some people have that. I've got hundreds of signups in one day, but because it's such a noisy world out there, you have to spread out mini launches over 100 days, and then this is how you do it. So some more examples. These are some SaaSes. These are built in Bubble. So SaaS is a little bit different, right? What I would recommend is that you can't just kind of like build. It's not like just a simple web app for a user, for consumer. If it's a SaaS, it's a business or somebody that needs to pay for this. It has to work. What you can do is build one feature of your SaaS. You can build it also in a closed and beta environment, right? That isn't maybe open, but you're still talking about it in the open. Because for somebody to properly evaluate a SaaS, it has to work, right? It has to do that job. Another example I really like is Traff. I don't know if you guys have heard of him. He's the guy who created a Super, which is an awesome no-code tool used for taking your Notion website and turning it into a website. And I interviewed him, and it's a free interview on sideprojectstack.com with him, and it's one of the best interviews I ever did because he so succinctly describes his approach. And he said when he was building Super, he just found one edge case, right? And he just made that one edge case, which was how do I whitelist or forget what it's called, white labeling the URL so that it displays properly when I'm creating a website in Notion, right? And so he launched with that, and then he just steadily built on features from there, and he was charging money from the beginning. And so your greatest risk isn't building something, it's getting validation. So I hope that point is coming across. So real quickly, I want to get to the end here, leave some time for questions. Here's a couple e-commerce examples for some basic e-commerce stuff that's outside of Shopify. Card, Airtable, Pico. I'm using this stack for a marketplace that I'm building right now. And I love it. It's a great stack that creates a basic membership site. I've had the Card Pro account, which is essentially like it's peanuts to pay for that, the cost for that over the yearly subscription. And I'm using the free version of Pico, and you can use a free version of Airtable. So for a few dollars, I'm getting a marketplace started, which is pretty incredible. And then here's an example of Noah, who's actually I'm working with on one of my newest projects. He created Roaster List, and he sold it as a no-code product. And he talks about kind of like, here were his V1, V2, right? He didn't start off with Webflow, which is a much higher learning curve than, let's say, Sheet2Site or Shopify, Pori.io or Softer.io, which I know 100 Days of No Code is built in as well. So the next thing is some examples of a messaging app. Basically, what I show here is just kind of some V1, V2s, right? Like, okay, you have this idea for text messaging. What is some basic ways that I can execute on that? And there's some examples through using a stack like this with tools that are kind of like a starter stack. And then here's an example of a product that was built with a little bit higher learning curve of tools: Parabola, IBM, Watson, and Twilio. Um, and then community. Here's an example of another stack where they had a kind of a V1, V2, where they started off with just a few basic tools. And the idea and the name of the game is getting something up and functioning, hey, Tony, as easily as possible so that you can get some validation. And then later, once he got his community going, he has hundreds and thousands of people in his community, is then able to then talk into his community to see, okay, what do they need? What do I need to create? And then he got into and spent, it was worth his time to create a version 2 of this. Here's another example of an internal tooling product that I think is brilliant by Nadia. She created this tool called mRegister, and she's located in Africa, and in Rwanda, and she created a way to digitally register people who arrive in physical locations. So instead of everybody touching the same pen and paper, that during COVID, all they had to do was scan a QR code, and then they could sign in. So she was able to get this up and going in a matter of weeks and get validation and show actually and demonstrate a measured decrease in COVID cases at those locations because of a tool like this. So something like this is hard because it's not hard to create it. It's hard to know what are the tools to use, which is the big barrier with no code. Another example that I wanted to show here is job boards. So I recently had somebody reach out to me. It's not in these examples here. Hey, I want to create this job board in Bubble. And I said, well, what I would advise is that why not build it in a job board sheet, or and there's a few other examples like Poirier or Software.io, where you can literally get this up and going in a day. And then that way you can spend your time and focus on building an audience. And then once you know that audience's needs, then you can spend the investment of time or money into building into Bubble, which would allow you to have a lot more flexibility and customization in what you need for your unique market. Wrapping up here, a couple more slides. This native mobile app. So some of the popular apps that are used for that is Adalo and Thunkable. Thunkable is a much higher learning curve than Adalo. Adalo, I think, is good. I don't think it's great. I'm not here to slam any tools, but I've talked to these makers. I've seen the things that they've run into. Not just Sebastian here, but many other makers. I've seen some of the limitations. I think Adalo is good if you need to absolutely have to have a native app, but I would almost usually never recommend starting with native app. The iteration cycle is too slow nowadays. It's 2021. Your best bet and your advantage is having the fastest feedback loop. That's why startups outcompete big businesses. Well, if you're an indie hacker and you're creating a side project, you're competing with not necessarily competition, but within yourself and your time. Because as a side project, you're not all in, right? And you're trying to determine if something's valid or not. It's going to take you too many months to get a native app right. And you're going to give up on your idea, or you're going to move on to something else. You'll be disinterested, or you convince yourself to move on to something else. So for me, I don't want to see that happen. So how can you avoid that? Creating something like using Glide or a native, maybe like a mobile responsive version first, using Glide to get that validation with some powerful tools out there that you can, in my opinion, is one of the best ways to go. Oh, so here's another example of this. Dan Perry, he's another phenomenal maker out there that I would suggest that you follow. He's very prolific. He's one of the best that I've seen out there, trying all these different tools. Has a great product knowledge, very helpful, friendly guy. He's used Adalo to build micro, and then it also functions as a PWA. He's also building in Bubble right now, and so if you are considering building Adalo, I think he's a go-to source to talk to that can tell you the ins and outs. All right, so kind of give the landscape there. So how do you go about this? Like, what do you do? So, we're all friends here. Reach out to me now or on Twitter. You can find me. Just ask me questions. I'll be more than happy just to tell you exactly what you need to do. I've got some resources available. GetStack.io, which is on side project, stack.com. Also the leansideproject.com. Basically, here's a snapshot of the database. It's 150 projects. And here's the skill level I was talking about, right? So you can filter by category, or we have over 10 different categories of products. and different stages. And what I do is I provide the color commentary so you can kind of piece together what's possible given where you are today. And then this will help give you your starting point. Okay, what are the exact, what are the exact tools I need to use? If I were to bounce out of this, I can actually do a quick demo here. So let's say, I'm building a job board, for example. Oops, let me back this over here. And we'll demo just a question that came through my email yesterday. So you can go into this drop down here. Shoot, I forgot. There's the filter. I always get type of project. I hate the filter with Airtable because it always tricks me no matter every time I use it. So you can see here when I add that, you can see then all these job boards here. And then you can see instantly examples and screenshots. Actually, let me slow down a little bit. You can see screenshots, and I've taken a little bit of video of what those look like. So this essentially can serve as a swipe file for you. You can visit those. You can see what type of business they are, connect with the maker to ask them questions. And here's the stacks they use, the exact tools they use to create them. Then I get estimated time to create those, as well as these teardowns. I have 110,000 words worth of product teardowns here that talk about, okay, here are the key learnings and insights that you can learn from this maker. And there you can find those filterable here. And finally, the skill level here, you can sort this. You can add another filter. It got me again. Let's see, where is it? Skill level. And I can say, hey, I'm just starting out. And I can filter by starter stack. And so now I can see, okay, what are the exact tools I need to use to build my job board? That might be a good place for me to start. So now this points you in the right direction. So you have a much better starting place than 95% of the people out there. This is something that the reason why I've sold and have had hundreds of people purchase this, and so far is because it's helping people get started with their no-code journey. And so with that, that brings me to the end. My goal was to do 40 minutes. I think I've done 41 minutes, so I'm going to pat myself on the back. Before when I presented, I've done a terrible job of going way over. I wanted to make sure that I've provided plenty of time for any questions and things like that. So I just want to thank you all for listening to me. I hope that was helpful, and feel free to ask me any questions.
Yeah, thanks so much, Michael, and yeah, good job on the time front. Yeah, there was a hell of a lot of value in there, and I loved how you went into all those different case studies. Really helps bring it to life. All these points you make. And I have to say so myself, as someone that has the Lean Side project, that the resources are goldmine, as you should have seen by now from Michael's little demo. But if you haven't, then I highly recommend checking it out. So on that note, yeah, does anyone have any questions for Michael? I've got a few myself. I've jotted down, but yeah, please come off mute if you have any, and ask away. And if you can't come off mute, just put them in the chat and I'll ask them for you.
And sometimes maybe people might not feel comfortable, and that's okay. Just direct message me and shout me out on Twitter. I would love to answer any questions.
Rashem, is that I see you're off mute. Feel free to ask away.
Can you guys hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks, Michael, for the great insights on no-code tools. I have this one question. So you mentioned that during the version 1, you select a rather easier tool for building your product, and then once your product matures, or once there are more complications to the project, then you switch to a different or higher tool. So during this transition, is it like very much complicated to then transfer it to another tool with all your databases or all your things already set up in another tool? Does it make it harder?
Yeah, absolutely. It does. And that is one of the things that makes it difficult because if you are transferring it into another tool, you're going to have to restart and rebuild. But the problem isn't, and what I've noticed in my experience, and I've seen this time and time again, is your greatest risk is not building it or even building it twice into another product. It's getting validation and building something that people want. And it's spending the time actually to build an audience in the beginning, so that you actually have people that care about whatever that you're doing. And so, unless you're able to quit your job and have, survive on no income, which I would not recommend, what's the safe way to approach that? It's to build as minimally as you can. And because that starter stack could take a weekend to build, what's your risk? What's your opportunity cost, right? And it'll allow you to, get a lot more validation quicker. So for example, a practical example, let's say like you build in Glide and you have a database of people signing in. Actually, here's a good example. I'll use myself. I originally started building the Lean Side Project in a tool called Builder. The problem was it was much more low code than no code than I thought. And I thought I had an unfair advantage because they were helping me, teaching me how to use the platform, because I thought that it was going to be able to do some things that would really provide an advantage or a really nice value add for what I was trying to do. It turns out that my early users didn't care about those things. So I was spending all my time using a more difficult tool for features that actually the people who were purchasing the Lean Side Project, they didn't need. So I said, why am I continuing to beat my head against the wall here? It's taking me forever to get this product built. So then I turned to Bubble, and I was able to make a Bubble app and do everything my users needed in 10 days. And the pain part that was difficult was I then had to transfer all of my existing customers into the new database from Builder to Bubble. And what I've seen with all these tools, it's very easy to upload any type of data that you have. You put it in a CSV, or you can manually add it. So I had, in the beginning when I first launched it, the first couple of weeks, I had, dozens and dozens of users. And so I had to manually port that over into the database in Bubble, which took, it took 2 or 3 hours to do.
Okay,
But if I had started, if you start on a lower tool, what is the opportunity cost? Well, if you're using a tool that has a higher learning curve or using something that's more difficult to learn, you're looking at potentially 30 to 60 days of time of possibly going in the wrong direction or building something that nobody wants, compared to a weekend of extra of effort. So to me, that is a game changer, because so many makers have seen building something is hard, monetizing is hard. Ask anybody, and it's not about building one thing, it's about building many things over time. And so that's your greater risk in my experience. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, Michael. And I sometimes, I have this idea, and then I think which app I can, or which tool I can use to build that, and then I go into this endless loop of learning that tool and not building what my idea was. And this happens so many times. And and it's not just that you don't know the tool. Sometimes you finalize that you want to build in this tool, but then you also, due to the lack of technical knowledge, you also don't know how to perform that certain type of action. So let's say, one idea was to have an application or kind of directory wherein you can see all the famous tweets or most retweeted tweets of your famous people on Twitter, or most liked tweets of those people, so that you can just go through them anytime you want. You can bookmark them, all those things. But I really don't know how to get that data from Twitter and put that into the tool. So these kind of things you still miss, even with the
So can I give some feedback on that?
Yeah, sure, please.
So 2 things. One is Madhuri. She's in India. She's a friend of mine. She's created over 30 products. She's had one of them gross over 400,000 in revenue. She created a no-code learning system that was customized, that really allowed her to have an advantage and provide extra value. And she talks about this. And when I interviewed her, she said, it's so frustrating. You get started with the tool and then you find out it doesn't do what the thing that you think it should do or you want it to do. And I've run into it. And that's why I started over 2 years ago. I started Side Project Stack, which actually next month will be 2 years. I can't believe it. Because of that very reason. I was spending 50% of my time learning the wrong tools, building the wrong things. And so that's the value. And I'm not trying to promise, I'm not trying to sell the database, Lean Side Project Stack. But if you go to Side Project Stack, /no code tech stacks, I have 100 projects there located with all the tools we use to build them. And so you can kind of reverse engineer it to see, okay, these are the like-minded projects. Here's the tools they use to help reduce that risk that you spend time building with the wrong tool. The second thing is this: a good friend of mine, Shareth, who's now working at Product Hunt, he built a tool called Shoutout, and the first version of this, he built it in Bubble. But what he did was it was a very minimal version. It did one thing, and you could log in and you could like kind of tag some of your tweets, and it really wasn't that helpful. But he was able to get actual users and validate the demand for this. Now he had leverage to work with developers to help actually create an actual really workable, valuable product where he's charging money for, and he's earning like $1,000 a month in revenue, right? So success might be that you just prove the concept and validate, because it is hard. Have you ever tried to convince a developer to build something with you? That's a huge risk for them. But if you actually have something proven on a basic level, and for one of the ways that you could do this is you could just manually, and this isn't sexy, but you can manually do what you're saying in some type of Bubble app or some type of Glide app, right? And then provide that and validate the overall concept and do that manually. One of my favorite stories is when Stripe started. I don't know if you know this, but when you would submit your credit card information, that credit card information would come to them, and it wasn't automated. They would actually have some guy in a room with a credit card machine and type in that credit card information to charge for that Stripe. And then they would send back and trigger back a validation that the charge went through. So that's sometimes, and that's the hard part and creative part is, what one thing can you do? And one of the things I teach in the book is called Segmentize your product. And this is actually an advantage. A lot of people get, and especially me, would be sad of like, I can't build my whole thing. That's actually a good thing, because you want to, when you segmentize your product, what are all the features that make up your vision? Those all become micro products. Which one of those? I guarantee you there has to be one of those that you could manually do or minimally do and build that out and then get validation for it, get users, and then and the universe is a powerful place. If you start broadcasting that, you will attract people that could help you. And then maybe, because you might not know how to do those things, get connected with people who might be able to build out the rest of your vision. And then you're able to build in the open and build out all those features. Is that helpful?
Yeah, Michael, thanks.
Cool. I know what you're talking about, because actually I wanted to do something with Twitter, and it's just Twitter's API and documentation is a nightmare. I wanted to do something with it, and I couldn't figure it out, and I got frustrated and I gave up. So it's sometimes a hard thing, but try to find what you can do. Yeah,
understood.
Awesome. Great question, great answer. Thanks, Michael and Rishem. Tony, Daniel, or David, do you have any questions before we wrap up for today's session?
Did you take time out of a launch day to talk to us today?
Who, me? Launch?
Yeah, you. Aren't you launching?
Oh, you went on mute. Am I launching?
Yeah, aren't you launching like a tiny acquisition type thing or micro acquisition site today? I have been off the Twitter for a little bit, but I thought today you were launching.
Oh, no, definitely not yet. But if Max wanted me to, I would do that in a heartbeat. So next weekend we're gonna do it like a soft launch, on just go live on beta on Twitter. It's gonna be super minimal on purpose. But yeah, that's the plan, is next weekend. We'll see what happens.
Awesome. Sorry, over to you again, Tony.
Oh no, I was gonna say good luck.
Thanks, man. Yeah. So what it is basically just a no code only product, marketplace where you can buy and sell no code products. So that's a differentiator. I've actually had it. I'm so frustrated because I wanted to get done with the Lean side project a lot sooner. And I actually was planning to do this in the beginning of the year. So my co-founder, Noah, he actually came to me with this problem. He's like, hey man, selling a no code project is not easy. He sold his roaster list actually in presentation. So I was channeling my inner Traff, and Traff said, just find one edge case and go with it. And I said, screw it, let's do it. Let's see what happens. And so far there's been some I've got 50 signups, and we'll see what happens. But it's just another experiment. I have no idea if it's going to be of interest to people, but so far it seems like there's something. Thanks for asking, man. I got to catch up with you, see what you're building next. You're always up to something.
I've been freelancing, so I've been stuck doing other people's stuff and no time for my own. I need like Max's InMotion app to keep me able to build my thing and then other people's stuff. I don't have your wherewithal to be building at 1 a.m. and tweeting about building at 1 a.m.
Man, well, it's probably going to be an early death for me. I'll sleep.
Yeah, that's one of the phenomenal things about Michael's journey is we can easily forget that he's got a 9-to-5 job and many kids. So yeah, I continue to forget that, and when I do remember, I'm always slightly in awe of how you do it. So yeah, it's a really inspiring journey, and I really like the way you're building no code acquisition, just in the kind of the very minimal incremental, like build in public way you're doing it. There's no flashy launches, there's no like we're here, like it's very kind of moving at the pace you can go at and kind of bringing other people on that journey with you. So I think that's such an interesting case study in itself. So yeah, keep doing what you're doing. Before we wrap up, just want to ask, does anyone else have any other questions? If not, I shall pass over to Michael for some kind of just to leave us on some final words or of wisdom or anything you want to kind of share before we wrap up. So I'll give 10 seconds to anyone that has a question. If they don't, then we're good to go. Yeah.
And you can always reach out to me. You don't have to be just in this time frame. But I want to say thank you, Max and Tony. I've known you guys, for a long time, the past year and year plus, whatever it is. And I stand on the shoulders of makers like you guys, and the hundreds I've talked to, I've learned from. And it's not just me figuring things out. So because of the community, allows me to have momentum and I'm not going to say I made it, but allowed me to get to this point. And so I'm so thankful for that. And I've learned from others. And that's what's so great about this community. And I love what you're doing, Max, with 100 Days of No Code. I'm in awe of what you've done and how you've built it, and community, doing community is hard. And Tony, I absolutely love your go-to. I'm a great knowledge expert on if I get stuck with Bubble and things like that. And so, it's really a community effort. We wouldn't be here without the community. Guys.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Yeah, really appreciate that. And thanks everyone for coming as well. As Michael says, reach out to him on Twitter, reach out to me or whoever. I'm sure we're happy to get back to you. So yeah, thanks again for coming. Let me know if you need anything. In the meantime, hopefully see you at next week's workshop with Coda. And yeah, that's a wrap, I think. And the recording of this will be up tomorrow-ish. So stay tuned. But cheers, guys, and have a good rest of your day.
All right.
Have a good one, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.